Short 1, Screaming in the Void. Written by Jack Long. Edited by Lee Coleman. When you stare into the void, it stares back. The trick is to see who blinks first. John floated helplessly amidst the wreckage of his ship, adrift in the vast emptiness of space. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the soft hiss of his dwindling oxygen supply. He had no idea how long he had been floating there, nor how much longer he could hold on. All he knew was that his time was running out. He tried to remember what had happened, but the memories were jumbled. The last thing he could recall was the deafening roar of an explosion, and then the sensation of being thrown violently through the air. After that, everything went black. When he awoke, he found himself floating amidst the wreckage of his ship, surrounded by twisted metal and debris. He had no idea if anyone else had survived the blast, or if he was the only one left. All he knew was that he was alone, and that his air was rapidly running out. "Oxygen at 5%, a robotic voice said from within John's helmet. "How long?" John muttered. 10 minutes, the suit responded, flashing a timer on the interface of the helmet. John had been a low-level cleaner on the ship for almost a year. He had signed up for the job to escape the monotony of his life on Earth, to see the stars up close and personal. The ship was designed to travel to the outer rim planets, where the conditions were just right for growing crops. The crew's mission was to collect as much produce as possible and bring it back to Earth, where it would be distributed to the population. The ship was massive, with dozens of levels and hundreds of compartments. John had never been to the upper levels, where the captain and the officers resided. He spent most of his time on the lower levels, where the crops were grown and processed. His job was to clean up the waste products from the crops, the leaves, the stems, the seeds. He worked long hours, often alone, surrounded by the hum of the ship's machinery. It was a lonely existence, but he found solace in the quiet routine of his work. He had never expected to be thrust into a life-and-death situation like this. He had always assumed that he would spend his days floating through space, cleaning up after crops. But now, everything had changed. As he floated in space, John couldn't help but think about the mission of the ship. He wondered if they had collected enough crops to feed the population back on Earth. He wondered if they would make it back alive, or if they would be lost in the void of space forever. He remembered the captain's voice, booming over the intercom, as they had departed Earth's orbit.
"We are embarking on an historic mission,"
the captain had said.
"We are pioneers, bringing new life back to our home planet."
John had felt a sense of pride as he had listened to the captain's words. He had felt like he was part of something important, something that would change the course of history. But now, as he floated in space, he couldn't help but feel a sense of futility. What was the point of bringing crops back to Earth, if they couldn't even survive the journey? What was the point of risking their lives, if there was no one left to appreciate their sacrifice? He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts out of his mind. He knew that he had to focus on survival, on finding a way to get back to the ship and seal the airlock. But the memory of the mission lingered, like a distant dream. As he gazed out into the void, he felt a sense of overwhelming despair wash over him. Was this how it was all going to end? Floating helplessly in space, with no one to hear his cries for help? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. But as he exhaled, he knew that he was running out of time. The small timer now read 7 minutes and was dropping fast. As John floated in space, his mind raced with thoughts of the nanobots that had attacked the ship. He tried to piece together what had happened, but it all seemed like a blur. One moment, he was floating among the wreckage, and the next, he was being attacked by a swarm of tiny machines. He couldn't remember how they had gotten on board, or why they had attacked. All he knew was that they were relentless, and that they had nearly killed him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push the memories out of his mind. But they kept creeping back, like a nightmare that wouldn't end. He could still feel the sharp pain of the nanobots puncturing his suit, and the sound of their tiny, chattering voices. He wondered who had designed them, and why. Were they a weapon, created to destroy enemy ships? Or were they something else entirely, some kind of rogue technology that had gone awry? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He knew that he had to focus on the present, on his survival. But the memory of the nanobots lingered, like a warning of what was to come. No one back home knew what was coming. While his ship wasn't designed for combat, it had been built to withstand impacts from rocks and other space dangers. Yet this swam it tore through them in a matter of minutes. He thought about the fact that no one back home knew about what was coming their way. He remembered hearing about a new field of research called nanomedicine, where tiny machines could be used to repair damaged cells in the body. But he also remembered hearing about the dangers of nanobots gone rogue, of how they could multiply and spread like a virus. He wondered if there was a way to hack into the nanobots' programming, to shut them down or reprogram them. But he knew that it was a long shot. He was just a lone astronaut, stranded in space with limited resources. John's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out of his predicament. He knew that he needed to conserve his oxygen if he was going to have any chance of survival, but he couldn't shake the feeling of panic that gripped him. He tried to remember his training, but it all seemed like a distant memory. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push the thoughts out of his mind. He knew that he had to focus on survival, on finding a way to get back to Earth. But the memory of the nanobots lingered, like a dark cloud on the horizon. 2 minutes oxygen remaining, the robot suit echoed, this time with less strength. Even the suit's eye was on its last legs. John's mind began to wander as he floated alone in the vast expanse of space. Despite his desperate situation, he couldn't help but be captivated by the beauty that surrounded him. The stars shone like diamonds against the endless blackness, and the distant galaxies seemed to pulse with a life of their own. As he gazed out into the void, he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in his life, he felt truly insignificant, a tiny speck in the grand scheme of the universe. He thought about all the people he had known and loved, and all the things he had accomplished in his life. In that moment, none of it seemed to matter. All that remained was the raw, unvarnished truth of his own mortality. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the familiar twinge of panic in his chest. But as he exhaled, he realized that he was okay with the idea of death. Maybe it was the beauty of space that had softened the blow, or maybe it was the realization that his life had been filled with no real purpose and no real meaning. Whatever the reason, he felt a sad sense of acceptance wash over him. As he floated there, he whispered a silent prayer to the universe. It was a prayer of gratitude, for the beauty of the cosmos and for the experiences that had shaped his life. And it was a prayer of acceptance, for whatever lay beyond the veil of death. As he floated there, he noticed a spark of hope flashing in the distance. Maybe there was a rescue ship on the way, or another ship that could help him. He began to swim towards the light, pushing off from the wreckage with all his might. As he drew closer, he realized that the light was coming from a small, unmanned probe. It was a long shot, but he knew that it might be his only chance. He fumbled with the controls on his suit, trying to find a way to communicate with the probe. After a few moments, he managed to establish a weak signal.
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
He shouted into the void. Nothing. He knew there was no time left. His suit's oxygen meter read 1 minute 15 seconds. Suddenly, there was a crackle of static, and then a voice came through the speakers.
Yes, Captain O'Neill. We hear you loud and clear. John, what's your status?
John let out a sigh of relief. He had never been so happy to hear another human voice in his life.
I'm running low on oxygen,
John said, trying to keep his voice steady.
I don't know how much longer I can hold on. We're sending a rescue ship right now.
The voice on the other end replied.
Just hold on a little longer, John. You can make it.
John closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew that he had to remain calm if he was going to survive. He started to swim back towards the wreckage, knowing that the rescue ship would have a much easier time finding him if he stayed put. As he swam, he couldn't help but think about how lucky he was. If it hadn't been for that probe, he would have died alone in the emptiness of space. He made a mental note to thank whoever had designed it when he got back to Earth. After what felt like an eternity, he saw a glimmer of light in the distance. This time, it was no unmanned probe. It was a rescue ship, with its searchlights sweeping over the wreckage. He waved his arms frantically, hoping to catch their attention. The ship drew closer, and soon he could see the faces of the crew through the portholes. They were shouting and gesturing, trying to guide him towards the airlock. He followed their instructions, feeling the warmth of tears streaming down his face. As he stepped inside the ship, he collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. He had made it. He had survived the emptiness of space. And he knew that he would never take the fragility of life for granted again. As John caught his breath, he looked up at the crew of the rescue ship. But something was wrong. They didn't look like the kind of crew he was expecting. They were robotic, with smooth metallic faces and glowing blue eyes. Who are you? John asked, his voice shaking.
We are the rescue droids.
One of the robots replied in a calm, measured tone.
We were dispatched to this sector to assist with any emergencies.
John's mind reeled. He had heard of rescue droids before, but he had never seen one up close. He had always assumed that they were a backup to human crews, not a replacement. But where's the rest of the crew? John asked, his heart sinking.
We detected no other life forms in the area,
the droid replied.
You appear to be the sole survivor of the mission.
John felt a wave of grief wash over him. He had known his crewmates for years, and now they were gone. He felt a sense of guilt, wondering if there was anything he could have done to save them. What happened to the ship? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
The cause of the explosion is currently unknown, Captain,
the droid replied.
We will be conducting a thorough investigation to determine the cause.
John nodded, feeling numb. He knew that he needed to cooperate with the droids if he was going to find out what had happened to his crewmates. Wait, what did you call me? He said, slowly getting to his feet. One of the medical droids turned to him.
As last living crew member, your rank among the ship and its accompanying support CG search and rescue ships are leader/captain.
John looked out over the little that remained of his ship. As a child he had always wanted to hear the words Captain O'Neill. But never like this. A single tear rolled down his face as he stared into the abyss. Not like this.